back to the republic that those men, helped create and were fighting for. And let's look at it this way. The left, my entire life, has used the courts to create legislation for things that they could never get through a legislature properly. Things like the Roe v. Wade decision and abortion. Things like gay marriage. They got them to the courts. They could never get them through any legislature because it was rejected and they never had the votes to get there. So they used the courts to legislate. And so now they're just screaming mad because the Supreme Court's not doing the work for them anymore. The Supreme Court's actually saying, no, you can't do that. That's wrong. You're out of line here. That's unconstitutional. And man, they're trying to delegitimize the court at every turn, aren't they?
They certainly are. And academia was even worse on this. And there was a Harvard president that created this whole idea of the living Constitution by appointing a Harvard Law School dean that literally borrowed from Darwin's Origin of the Species, that says you can make it up as you go. You can evolve the Constitution. Just because you're wearing a robe, that gives you the power sometimes, from immaculate, perception or something to make up the law and change the Constitution. The courts ended that. And I got to tell you, for 40 years, I've been, fighting for this to happen. And, in the affirmative action cases, and I call affirmative action, those are their words. It's really preferential racial relief. It's preferential race. And when it's in religious liberty, they change that to mean you got to have a secular reason for everything you do. Well, the Constitution doesn't say those things. Then they said, well, we want to be able to do abortions, and we can't get that through the political system. So we'll get an unelected judge to, put it right next to the First Amendment as a constitutional right. The court ended that this last year. And if you read all these opinions together, what they're doing, they're not taking any political position. They're not changing, we're not being Republican versus Democrat. We're being, honest versus lying. And we are actually saying what the Constitution says. We're saying what a statute says. And that's caused people that do have a political agenda to be very upset. And that's why you see efforts to delegitimize the court by saying, oh, we need to add more members that'll, have our political philosophy, or we need to say nasty things and hurt people's reputations in order to delegitimize.
We have to save the court by destroying it, by adding, 5 members or 10 or 105 or whatever it turns out to be. Thankfully, Joe Biden, for all his failures, which are many, he did say again recently that no, putting more people on the Supreme Court is nothing he wants to be involved with. And so we'll see if that happens. But, don't ever dismiss the left's ability to have a really bad idea and hold on to it for years, for decades, until they can finally weasel it through. Because that's where we are. Because at some point, if you have a president that's a more radical president, a more radical Congress, then that's what they'll do. They'll radicalize and ram it through. My biggest concern today here about the Supreme Court is that Clarence Thomas is too old. And I worry about his health, because if you lose Clarence Thomas, you've got enough weak-willed members of the conservative majority on too many occasions that make it unpredictable if you lose just one staunchly conservative member of the court. That's my concern. What do you say?
And Thomas is the elder statesman that has always, more than even Scalia, has always said we are in a very special role in our constitutional republic, and it's only to decide cases and controversies and stop making up the law to suit your political preference. And with regard to the relentless ideas of those that have these political agendas never giving up, that's why people that are on the other side of truth, that stand for truth, need to be just as relentless. I got to tell you, this has been very encouraging to me this last year, because I've had 40 years of losses sometimes, and sometimes 30 years of losses, where we have, tried to put truth in front of the court or into the marketplace of ideas through academic articles. And, to see it finally happening after, 40 years is refreshing. Now, the rest of the culture needs to catch up. The rest of the culture says, let's just, burn it all down and create a Politburo or a Venezuelan type of government. And
oh, my God, it's crazy if they say, but you're right.